The camera opens in silence. A grainy, flickering image from a home security system captures a hallway. Empty, dimly lit, almost sepia-toned in the late-night surveillance haze. A door creaks open off-screen. Faint voices echo. The footage skips. Static hums, then cuts to black. In the next frame, Kevin Hart sits across from a friend on his podcast set. The room is cozy but heavy, cloaked in a tension that doesn't match his usual high-energy vibe. There's no laugh track, no jokes, no comfort in his eyes. Just a man, tired, wary, carrying something he's not sure he's ready to speak aloud. His hands are clasped together tightly. His gaze doesn't quite meet the camera. He takes a breath, not for air, but for courage. "That night at my house," he starts, voice low and deliberate. "That changed everything." The friend leans in slightly, sensing the shift. Kevin pauses, as if weighing whether to keep going or to bury it like he has for years. The silence stretches, not empty, but loaded. You can hear the hum of studio lights, the ambient noise of the world waiting. There's something in his face, not just pain, but fear, maybe even guilt, not for what he did, but for what he let happen, or what he witnessed, and never stopped. Behind his voice, other voices begin to murmur in the distance. Industry whispers about Diddy's infamous parties, the ones no one talks about on record, stories of NDAs, of guests stripped of their phones, of rooms they weren't supposed to enter, of boundaries quietly broken. The screen fades to black again. Kevin's voice cuts through, barely a whisper now. People think they know the truth. They don't. A sharp beat pulses. Music rises, not dramatic, but dark, subtle, like a memory clawing its way back to the surface. The following story contains themes of manipulation, coercion, and disturbing behavior. Viewer discretion is advised. Before the whispers, before the fallout, before the night that would fracture a friendship and haunt a home, there was Kevin Hart, America's funny man, the high-energy hustler from North Philly who clawed his way from dank comedy clubs and second-rate open mics to the glittering peak of Hollywood. He was the guy who made you laugh through your pain, because that's how he survived his own. Every punchline masked a scar. Every sold-out arena, a milestone on a journey born from grit, rejection, and relentless hustle. From stand-up to superstar, Kevin Hart can't lose, read one headline in Variety. Another dubbed him the king of comedy's second golden age. And it wasn't just press. It was box office records, Netflix specials, stadium tours, even fitness brands and tequila ventures. Kevin Hart wasn't just a celebrity. He was a brand, a business, a movement. The world loved him because he was real, accessible, grounded. You saw yourself in Kevin Hart, or at least the version he gave us. And then there was Sean Combs, Diddy, Puff Daddy, a name that changed as often as the winds that moved through the hills of Calabasas. He was no everyman. He was a kingmaker, a billionaire mogul with a Rolodex of power and a reputation draped in mink and mystery. Where Kevin made his name through laughter, Diddy built his empire through fearlessness, through calculation, through spectacle. His parties were legendary, fountains of champagne, midnight performances, a guest list that read like the Grammys and the Illuminati combined. Bad Boy for Life wasn't just a track. It was a warning, a brand of invincibility. Diddy didn't just move through the industry, he controlled it. There were rumors, always. Strange disappearances, silenced assistants, celebrity breakdowns. But in Hollywood, power is often its own alibi. So when Kevin Hart and Diddy began to appear together, at parties, on yachts, behind velvet ropes, most people assumed it was the natural collision of success. Two titans connecting, the comedian and the mogul, one grounded in humor, the other floating in infamy. But beneath the flashing cameras and curated smiles was a quiet current. Something darker, something unspoken. Kevin looked smaller in those pictures, some said, less like himself, as if laughing a little too loud or smiling a little too hard. They were different men, one a self-made comic with nothing to hide, the other a manipulator of masks and mirrors. And when those two worlds collided, something cracked. So when these two crossed paths, few knew how dangerous that friendship would become. We saw the photos, the handshakes, the brotherly embraces. But what we didn't see, what Kevin never wanted the world to see, was what happened behind the curtain. The moment when the punchline stopped, and the cost of staying silent started to rise. The truth wasn't on stage. It was in the shadows. And this time, Kevin Hart wasn't telling a joke. He was about to tell a story. Kevin Hart never had the luxury of a soft beginning. He was born into chaos. The broken bones of a fractured home in North Philadelphia. His father was a ghost with a drug addiction, and his mother, strict and silent, bore the weight of both parenting and poverty. Their home wasn't quiet. It echoed with tension, with fear, with dreams that were too fragile to speak aloud. For Kevin, laughter wasn't a choice. It was armor. As a kid, he learned quickly that making people laugh could diffuse danger, could earn him a moment of peace, of approval, of safety. The stage, when he finally found it, felt like a refuge. But the path to it was brutal. Cramped comedy clubs with peeling paint and sticky floors, audiences half asleep or half drunk, jokes that bombed, auditions that ended in silence, and early TV pilots that were stillborn before they ever aired. But Hart didn't quit. He couldn't afford to. Comedy wasn't just a career, it was survival. And eventually, persistence paid off. By the time the world started paying attention, Kevin was already scarred, already sharpened. He rose fast. Think like a man, ride along, laugh at my pain. His name became a brand, a beacon, a bankable hit. But behind the meteoric rise was a man still haunted by the question, what happens when they stop laughing? It was during that pivotal ascent, when Kevin was everywhere and everything, that Sean Diddy Combs entered the picture. They met through industry circles, casually at first. Diddy was a fixture at events, always surrounded by handlers and heat. But he took a liking to Kevin. Maybe he saw the hunger, maybe he liked the humor, maybe he saw something else. What began as a casual acquaintance evolved into something closer. Diddy started extending invitations, exclusive events, private gatherings, weekend escapes with the elite of entertainment. He spoke to Kevin not like a peer, but like a mentor, a gatekeeper offering a golden key. "You want to be more than just funny?" Diddy once reportedly asked. "You want to be unforgettable?" At first, it was intoxicating. Kevin was rubbing shoulders with moguls, sipping champagne in mansions where the floors cost more than his childhood home. But soon, the glamour gave way to a more disturbing reality. The events weren't parties, they were performances without an audience. Phones were confiscated at the door, NDAs were handed out like party favors. Rooms were off limits, doors were locked, and the energy shifted. There was a pattern Kevin started noticing. People entering rooms and returning changed. Quieter, tense, eyes flicking around as if checking for something they couldn't name. Conversations that stopped when certain names were mentioned. Women who looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Men who laughed too hard, too fast. At first, Kevin laughed it off. He'd say, "It's just how Hollywood works," or "Diddy's just extra." But behind the jokes was a seed of unease. One night, he confided in a close friend, off record, off camera. He described a party where something went wrong. He didn't go into detail, but the look in his eyes said more than the words ever could. "Something's not right, man," he said. It didn't feel safe. Still, he didn't walk away. Not then. You don't just walk away from someone like Diddy, not when you're still climbing, still proving, still terrified of losing everything you've built. And besides, what could he say? That a few parties felt strange? That the man behind the mogul mask was hiding something darker? Hollywood has a way of erasing those who speak out too soon. Kevin knew this, so he stayed silent, kept laughing, kept rising, but the seed had already been planted. And the night at Kevin's house, the one he refuses to talk about without a tremble in his voice, was still to come. That night wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the culmination, the moment when every red flag he'd ignored came crashing down in the most personal place imaginable, his home. He thought he could manage the shadow. He thought he could dance close to it without being consumed. He was wrong. It began as an ordinary evening in the most extraordinary of circles. Kevin Hart was hosting a private gathering at his LA home, not a party in the public sense, but one of those inner circle nights. No PR, no red carpet, just the select few who'd earned proximity to the rising mogul. His home, usually filled with laughter, The hum of his kids upstairs and the scent of burning sage and cigars now had a more curated vibe. Ambient music, subdued lighting, expensive wine. Guests arrived casually, familiar faces, A-list comedians, producers, influencers. It was meant to be intimate, safe, a celebration of sorts. Kevin had just inked a major development deal, another jewel in the crown of a career built on grit and good faith. Then Diddy arrived, not alone. He came flanked by his usual entourage, sharp suits, cold stares, men whose names no one quite knew, but who carried the weight of unspoken rules. Kevin greeted him at the door with a handshake that didn't linger. The energy shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The laughter didn't stop, but it changed, became thinner, more performative. Security was dismissed, Kevin later revealed. Diddy insisted it was unnecessary. "We're family," he had said. And Kevin, eager to keep things flowing, obliged. Cameras in the home were covered. For privacy, phones were placed in sealed pouches. That had become standard in Diddy's world. By midnight, the tone of the night had changed. Not drastically, but like the pressure in a room when a storm is coming. One guest said the air felt electric, but not in a good way. People were being led into different rooms, conversations behind closed doors, whispers, laughter with too many pauses. Then, something happened. Kevin has never spoken about the specifics on camera, but what's clear, and what his voice confirms in the few times he's let it slip, is that something went very wrong. That's how he describes it. "It was my house, and I didn't even feel like I was in control anymore." Some guests left early. Others didn't speak about that night again. But within days, rumors began to swirl. Beneath the surface, where Hollywood keeps its dirtiest secrets, there were murmurs. Someone had been drugged. Another claimed a young woman was seen stumbling out of a guest room, confused, disoriented, and later disappeared from social media. One source whispered that hidden cameras had been placed in private areas of the house. Another said the footage wasn't Kevin's. No one went public. No one pressed charges. But Kevin changed. His energy on sets shifted. He canceled appearances. His normally relentless social media presence slowed. In meetings, friends described him as distracted, hyper-vigilant, and unusually irritable. One insider said, he wasn't scared of Diddy. He was scared of what he now knew, and what that meant about the people he thought he trusted. He stopped hosting, stopped inviting. There were no more private gatherings, no more crossovers with Diddy. When asked in interviews why the two had grown distant, Kevin would deflect, laugh, change the subject, but the trauma was there, behind the smile, in the tightened jaw, in the silence that followed certain names. The industry noticed. A comedian, a friend of Kevin's from way back, dropped a cryptic tweet months later. "Some parties are just rooms with the lights turned off and the truth tied up in the corner." It was quickly deleted. Other whispers surfaced. Diddy's name floated like a ghost at other celebrity homes. Same patterns: confiscated phones, nervous assistants, rumors of coercion, of cameras, of blackmail. No one said anything publicly. Because in Hollywood, power protects itself. Years passed. Kevin kept climbing. On the outside, he was still unstoppable. But something had changed in his eyes. His jokes became safer. His circle, smaller. He turned his focus inward. Family, faith, fitness. But the night remained. The house where it happened was eventually sold. Then, one of Kevin's close associates, someone who had been there that night, leaked a chilling quote to an anonymous blog. He never spoke about that night again. Until now. It was a whisper at first, but it was enough to stir the air again. Enough for fans, journalists, and other insiders to start asking, what happened at Kevin Hart's house? Why did Diddy disappear from his life without explanation? Why had Kevin, a man who'd made vulnerability his brand, never told this particular story? And why, after years of silence, was he finally ready to speak? The answer, as it turned out, wasn't just about that night. It was about everything that led to it, and everything Kevin Hart stood to lose, or reveal. Because the real betrayal wasn't just what happened, it was who let it happen, and why no one stopped it. After that night, Kevin Hart didn't need to say anything out loud. His silence said enough. Those closest to him noticed the change first. In green rooms before shows, he was quieter. no longer the magnetic epicenter. He became distracted, often staring off mid-conversation, his trademark laugh delayed or forced. On set, he'd show up late, sometimes visibly shaken. Behind the closed doors of his sprawling LA office, panic attacks became routine. His therapist later confirmed Kevin began weekly emergency sessions shortly after that night. This wasn't exhaustion, it was fear. He told almost no one what had happened, not fully. But those who knew him best didn't need the details to understand. Something sacred had been broken inside him. The fortress of control and confidence that had carried him through decades of struggle had been breached. Kevin began pulling away from people, producers, publicists, even longtime collaborators. Industry friendships started to dissolve without explanation. Texts went unanswered. Meetings were missed. It was as if he'd lost the ability to trust, not just in others, but in the very system that had elevated him. The dream he'd built now felt like a trap. And then, like dominoes tipped in slow motion, came the public stumbles. First, the cheating scandal in 2017. A leaked video, a tearful Instagram apology, a man caught in the kind of trap Kevin had long avoided. He admitted his wrongs. But the narrative felt bigger, orchestrated, almost too perfectly timed. Some speculated, was this just a personal failing, or was Kevin being targeted? Then came the Oscar controversy. Old tweets surfaced, offensive jokes. Kevin initially refused to apologize again, insisting he'd grown. The Academy dropped him, the press swarmed. Headlines went from comedy's golden child to Hart's fall from grace. The sequence of events felt suspiciously timed. Distraction, scandal, cancellation, all crashing down like waves before he'd had a chance to recover from the night that started it all. A former PR executive whispered anonymously to a podcast, "You have to understand. When someone tries to break away from certain circles in this town, the backlash doesn't always come directly. Sometimes it shows up as chaos." Kevin never publicly linked these events to Diddy. He never said the name. But fans noticed. The two were never seen together again. The once tight association vanished, scrubbed from Kevin's timeline. No more birthday tributes, no more co-hosted events, not even a comment beneath each other's posts. Diddy remained silent too. And in that silence, Kevin tried to rebuild. He doubled down on his family, taking his role as a father more seriously, opening up in documentaries about his flaws and mental health. But the veneer of invincibility was gone. "I wasn't okay," he would later admit in a rare moment of candor. "I was smiling for the world and dying behind closed doors." He focused on fitness, on faith, on regaining control. But the ghost of that night never really left. It lingered. In the pauses between interviews, in the nervous glance when certain names came up, in the quiet clench of his fists when he spoke about betrayal. He moved homes, increased security, rewrote parts of his inner circle. Friends say he became obsessed with checking for hidden cameras, even in hotel rooms. One source claimed he stopped taking meetings unless they were in public places, with witnesses. And still, he wouldn't speak about Diddy, not directly, not yet. Because Hollywood has rules, and Kevin Hart knew them. Speak out too early, and you lose everything. Speak out too late, and you become complicit. So, for years, he lived in that tension, trying to protect his empire while safeguarding his sanity, trying to smile for the cameras while wondering if the cameras were ever truly off. The night at his house had cracked something inside him, but the real damage came after, not from the memory itself, but from the machine that demanded he pretend nothing happened. What we saw was the man performing. What we missed was the man unraveling. It started quietly, almost too quietly for a story so explosive. No headlines, no PR rollout, just a casual podcast drop late one Sunday night. A new episode of Gold Mines, Kevin Hart's show, one that usually featured conversations about entrepreneurship, mental resilience, and the comedy grind. But this time, there was no guest. Just Kevin, alone, a solo episode. The title was vague, Protect Your Energy, but within minutes, it was clear. This wasn't just another motivational monologue. Kevin's voice, usually smooth and upbeat, trembled at the edges. He wasn't reading off notes. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. "There are people in this business," he said, "who use power in ways that make you question your safety, your sanity. And if you speak up, If you try to get out, you realize just how many doors they actually control. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. The timing, the tone, the way his voice cracked after the phrase, "my own fucking house." For those who'd followed the breadcrumbs, the rumors, the disappearance of a once high-profile friendship, it was undeniable. Kevin was finally addressing that night. I invited someone in. I let my guard down. And what happened in return? I've carried that with me for years. Not just what was done, but the silence I kept afterward. He paused. You could hear him breathing, slow, measured, like someone reliving a nightmare with every syllable. It wasn't just me that was hurt. That's the part I can't get over. And I should have done something. I should have said something sooner. But when someone's built a fortress out of secrets, it takes time to find the door. The episode hit like a quiet detonation. Fans took to Reddit, TikTok, YouTube. Theories reignited. Clips from old interviews resurfaced. The timeline of Kevin and Diddy's public appearances was dissected frame by frame. But the story wasn't just about what Kevin said, it was about what happened next. Because the moment Kevin broke his silence, others followed. Former assistants, anonymous stylists, a backup dancer from a music video shoot in 2008. The voices were unverified, at first, but the patterns were identical. Stories of lavish parties where phones were confiscated, of coercion disguised as opportunity, of whispered threats, of people being disappeared from the industry after refusing to play along. And then came the leak. A former employee from inside Kevin's inner circle, someone who'd signed NDAs, someone who'd kept quiet for years, released a screenshot of a text conversation between them, and Kevin dated just days after the night in question. Kevin. He crossed a line. In my own fitting house. I can't unsee that shirt. Kevin. I let him in. And now I feel like I put people in danger. Employee. Should we say something? Kevin. You know how this town works. They'll bury us. The screenshot went viral. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was confirmation, not of a crime necessarily, but of a deep, disturbing fracture in trust, in safety, in the illusion of camaraderie that Hollywood so often sells. Major outlets picked it up. TMZ ran with it. Page 6, The Shade Room. The hashtag #Kevin News started trending. And with it, a wave of reawakened testimonies from others who'd crossed paths with Diddy's inner circles, some vague, some disturbingly detailed. But what made Kevin's revelation different wasn't just the fame, it was the humanity. For years, he had been the guy who could handle anything. Scandal, memes, late-night jokes. He bounced back from all of it. But now, he wasn't bouncing. He was breaking. I've always believed in keeping the peace, he said toward the end of the podcast. But peace isn't silence, not when people are hurting. That sentence landed like a thunderclap, because for the first time, Kevin wasn't just implying something had happened, he was admitting it. He was owning his complicity and staying quiet. And he was drawing a line in the sand, not just between himself and Diddy, but between the man he had to be to survive and the man he was becoming now. It wasn't a full confession, but it was the beginning of the end. For the silence. It was unlike any Kevin Hart interview the world had ever seen. Gone was the quick wit, the signature grin, the performative energy that had made him a household name. This time, he sat still, centered, hands folded. No entourage, no flash, just Kevin and the camera, and the weight of something too heavy to joke away. The network had promoted it for days as Kevin Hart, The Reckoning. A primetime sit-down with a veteran journalist known for probing the uncomfortable, but even the host, seasoned, composed, seemed to tread lightly. Because everyone knew this wasn't about scandal. This was about trauma. The lights dimmed. The first question hung in the air. Kevin, what happened that made you finally decide to speak? Kevin looked down for a moment, eyes clouded. Then slowly he lifted his head, not to the host, but directly into the lens. It wasn't one moment, he said. It was a buildup of silence. I got tired of carrying something that didn't belong to me. The interviewer pressed gently. You're referring to the incident that took place at your home. With someone in the industry? A long pause. Kevin nodded, almost imperceptibly. "When you feel powerless in your own home," he said, "you realize how this industry can swallow you whole. Not just your voice, but your sense of self, your sanity." The room was silent. He didn't name Diddy. He didn't need to. Every word was laced with the gravity of what wasn't said, the way his voice caught at the back of his throat, the way his eyes flinched as if bracing for impact. The public had seen Kevin Hart cry before, usually as a punchline. This was different. This was grief. "I didn't speak out then," he said, "because I thought I'd lose everything. My career, my family, my freedom." I stayed silent. But silence has a cost. He told the story not in headlines, but in sensations. How the laughter at the party turned cold, how the air in the room shifted, how he couldn't sleep for weeks afterward, jumping at shadows, how he felt complicit. Because I let it happen under my roof. He spoke about power, how it's weaponized behind closed doors, how fame can be a shield for predators, how fear keeps good men quiet. And most haunting of all, he spoke about regret. "I thought I was protecting people by staying quiet, but I see now, silence protects the wrong people." The interviewer leaned back, momentarily overwhelmed. There was nothing left to press. Kevin had already opened the wound wide.